Okay, welcome to take one of the Valor diagram on mold. This is something that I use pretty much in every single estimate appointment that I go on, and Teddy does too. And I had this thing created back in June of 2016, so I've been handing this thing out for a while. And what this is basically the S520 mold remediation standard in a picture format, because the S520 is a big deal in our industry. It's the Bible of our industry. So everything that I talk about comes out of this S520 book. And the problem I kept hearing from people years and years ago was they would go, okay, I'm going to hire you guys to cut out the visibly moldy walls. And I go, any moron can do that. That's not a skill. What you're hiring us for actually is our skills at the negative air pressure containment and our skills at the negative air pressure and our skills at the cleaning at the end. So to kind of go over a quick overview of this, I created this. I went ahead and drew all this out, all the content, all the words in here, and basically I had a graphic designer in London bring this thing to life. We went back and forth through several drafts to get the artwork and everything right and where I wanted it and everything, and it's pretty good for the most part. A few revisions I'd like to make, but it's not a big deal. So anyway, the first page of this is a biology lesson on mold, so that way, the clients know how we think about mold and colonies and mold spores and all that kind of stuff, so that way they get it, right? They understand what's up. And the middle section is, it shows negative air pressure containments and how we build them and why. And this is going to be kind of strange because the screen, the video is pretty zoomed in. So let me see here. We can kind of zoom out on this. You can see that it's a full page diagram, and then the backside gets into how we actually do the demolition and how we do the immaculate cleaning, which is the hardest thing we do, and actually the hardest to explain. So I'm just going to run through this as if you're a client. I know this is an internal Valor video. It's more of an education thing, but I'm just going to pretend like you're a client. So. Mold is nature's recycling program. Mold is meant to reclaim dead trees and plants that fall and die out in the forest and bring them back to earth. And the problem with this is that we build our houses out of dead trees. And so whenever you have mold growth, it's a direct cause and effect, from water. If you have mold, it's because water was there and grew mold. It's not like mold just spontaneously appears out of nowhere. And so whenever you see visible mold growing across drywall or framing or whatever, if you looked at it under a microscope, what it looks like is an ivy spreading across the surface, and just like ivy, it grows a root structure in that material to actually decompose it and return it back to earth. Now, the mold colony is what's visible to people, but we as mold nerds, we worry about what's called mold spores. So if you're going to take a cross-section of this colony on a microscopic level, what you would see rising up from the surface are these little things called hyphae, which are like stalks, like almost like celery stalks, and the tip are these mold spores. And the spores are the seeds of the mold colony itself. And the spores behave just like dandelion seeds. So the problem is if you cut into the mold, or you spray it with something, or God forbid you put a fan on it or a dehumidifier and it's blowing on it, then what happens is that these spores go airborne by the millions, and they cross-contaminate into other parts of the house or the level or the basement or whatever. So you might have visible mold in one room, but then they go in there and start tearing this stuff out, and now these mold spores have gone airborne and gone into other parts of the house and other rooms that weren't affected before. So. And the problem with these spores is that they're both microscopic and odorless, and so you can't see them and you can't smell them. The only way to know how many spores are present is by having some form of microscopic testing done. And so this is what throws a lot of people off, because they think, okay, if I smell mold, then I must be breathing spores in, and actually that's not true. Spores don't have an odor. When people are smelling that musty, moldy odor, what they're actually breathing in, or what they're smelling, is the mold colony itself digesting the drywall or the carpet or the wood framing or something. And it's part of the decomposition process as the mold eats the wood or eats the drywall that it off-gasses this odor. So it's almost like a mold fart, if you will. It's kind of fun. And the mold spores are the major causes of most reactions in people. And the problem is, people have a reaction to mold. If you're going to divide this chart up, like 90% of them have an allergic reaction, 10% get a chemical reaction, less than 1% gets a fungal infection. And this is what throws so many people off because, if you ask everybody on the street, hey, what do you do about mold? The most common answer you're going to hear is, oh, you need to kill it with bleach. And the problem is that, the scientists and the doctors are on the sidelines screaming, going, who cares about killing mold? Like, we could care less. The reason being is because the vast majority of people have an allergic reaction or a chemical reaction to mold. And the problem with that is you're going to have the exact same allergic reaction to dead mold as you are to living mold. So trying to kill it with chemicals makes no sense from a human health standpoint. My favorite analogy is I always tell people it's almost like, all this talk about killing mold with chemicals is like telling people with a peanut allergy that they need to go kill peanuts. That makes no sense, or if they had a spring allergy, they need to go kill the pollen. It's not, pollen isn't alive or dead. The peanut isn't alive or dead. It's just there. People just have allergic reactions to it. And so this is probably the biggest thing that we face, trying to educate people and getting them to understand what the mold standard says and how mold reacts and affects our health. So the only people that mold helps, when you're trying to kill it, are the people who get fungal infections. Now, people do get fungal infections, but it's extremely rare, and you have to be very sick or you have to be just very unlucky. But it does happen, and it will put you in the hospital because, unfortunately, the same stuff they used to treat the mold infections to get it out of your body is the same stuff that kills you. So it's pretty tough. You don't want to have that happen. And mold actually will it is possible for it to kill you. Apparently, mold is the number one killer of bone marrow transplant patients. So, but these are obviously people whose immune systems are extremely low already. Just really, really delicate. So, mold can kill you. So, you get these people who are skeptical. Oh, mold can't hurt me. Yeah, no, it definitely can. So, anyway. Now, this is the main diagram. I'm going to try to hold this thing up at the same time. So, I made this thing the main diagram. Let me continue on. Just do my normal spiel. So there's 4 basic steps to a mold remediation project. There's containment, negative air pressure, demolition, and immaculate cleaning. So what we do is, this is a wall that has theoretically mold on it. And what we do is build this freestanding containment around the mold called a containment barrier. And this is heavy-duty plastic. We call it 6 mil plastic. That's actually a standard for the mold industry. It's a 6 mil. It's a plastic thickness. So anyway, we put these big plastic walls up, and then we build these are tension poles that hold the plastic up, and then we actually seal it to the ceiling, the walls, and the floor with tons and tons of tape. So it actually forms a physical wall, and then we set up a negative air machine inside this chamber, and what this little guy does is he sucks air in, filters the mold spores out through the filters inside of him, and then the clean air that blows out of him, we actually hook that up to a duct and blow that clean air out the window. And people always go, why in the world are you guys blowing clean air out the window? And the reason is, while we're in here in our little bunny suits, physically cutting out the mold and disturbing it, the mold spore count skyrockets. It goes into the millions very, very quickly. It's almost like if you threw a rock at a hornet's nest. If you can imagine, that's a good analogy. And so this is a top-down view of that same chamber. And so this is the negative air machine. This is the containment. This is the negative air machine. And so, how this works is, as we're disturbing the mold colony, and these little red dots represent mold spores. So as we're disturbing the mold colony, and these little mold spores are going airborne by the millions, they're trying to take root somewhere else. They're trying to fly outside to other parts of the house and take root somewhere else more hospitable, because it's just almost like a tree, shaking it, and you get the fruit off of it or something, So. And so what happens when you build this containment and then you take the negative air machine and you duct the exhaust out of a window is that all the air in the house is being drawn to this point to feed air to this machine. And so this is called negative air pressure because this room is under negative pressure compared to this room. This room would be under positive pressure, this would be room negative pressure because the air is flowing into here. So as these mold spores are trying to work their way out, they're being met by a wall of air coming in. And this is a big engineering control on how to control mold spores and airborne contaminants. And this is really what keeps clients safe while we're doing our work. We can be in here just making an absolute mess and tearing stuff up, but as long as this negative air pressure is proper, everything's going to stay in this chamber, and it's going to be pushed into this machine. This little yellow thing here is called a manometer. I know it looks like manometer, but they just say manometer. So this is called a manometer. And this is probably the easiest way that the average person knows if the company they hired knows what they're doing, because if you see this, then great, this is a professional company, they're actually monitoring the pressure, because the S520 mold standard says that the containment has to be -5 pascals or more pressure. So this isn't amateur hour, this isn't guesswork. This actually is scientific, mechanical measurements that we have to make to make sure that we're keeping our clients safe. So, but the thing is that most companies don't even have a manometer, much less use it. And invariably, when I show this diagram to clients who've had a mold remediation before, they go, yeah, you know what, they built the containment and they set up the machine, but it just ran in here. They'd never hooked it they never ducted the exhaust out of a window. And so whenever if you don't hook the duct up, then it's called an air scrubber. So if you hook the duct up, it's called a negative air machine. If you take this duct off and it's just running, then it's called an air scrubber. And the best analogy I can come up with is, with the ducting hooked up, it's almost like if you had a bathtub full of dirty water and, you pulled the drained all the dirty water out and then filled it with clean water. Whereas if you don't hook this duct up and the machine's just running on air scrubber mode, under neutral pressure, it's like if you had that same bathtub full of dirty water, but as you drained a little bit of dirty water out at the same time while you filled it with a little bit of clean water. And it filters, but it's not nearly as effective as just draining the entire bathtub, filling it with clean water. So this negative air pressure is just critical to our work, and this is the biggest thing that companies mess up. There's no licensing for mold remediators in Virginia or Maryland. And even in DC, where we're licensed, it's still, nobody's coming to check our containments and make sure it's under negative air. So, this is truly the Wild West. So this is why I spend so much time trying to educate people and give them a visual diagram, so at least if they don't hire us, they can know when they're getting ripped off. Because we have had those phone calls and emails, where people go, hey, I didn't hire you guys, I hired, Mold Gone or whoever, somebody was cheaper, and they just came out and, customers just deflated because they at least they knew they got ripped off, so. Anyway, the demolition phase, everything in a house fits in 3 categories. It's either porous material, semi-porous, or non-porous, which I didn't include this non-porous category in this diagram because there's hardly anything in the house that's non-porous. Because the way we think about this, porous is like drywall, carpet, insulation. These are squishy. I won't say squishy, but these are materials where the mold's going to grow in it, it's going to grow through it, the roots are going to grow through the drywall, through the carpet, and basically you can't salvage it, because that's how we think about this. Can we get the mold out of this and restore it back to the way it was before the mold grew? And if the answer is no, then it should be torn out and thrown away. And this, as a matter of fact, is a diagram that shows, a lot of times the mold is 3 times, 4 times worse on the back side of walls than it is on the front side. So a lot of times, especially with plumbing leaks and foundation leaks, the mold that the client sees is typically much worse on the backside because the water's coming from the backside, so it's always worse back here. So anyway, porous materials are drywall, carpet, insulation. Semi-porous materials are gonna be like wood framing, concrete walls, foundation walls, things like that. And so what happens, the mold is again growing a root structure into the wood because it's trying to decompose the wood. And so what the mold standard says is you have to physically strip this whole layer out, roots and all, using some kind of physical method. And it says the remediator can choose whatever method they wish, but it has to be something physical. And matter of fact, let me just zoom in. Try to see if I can't zoom in a little bit more here, so you can see that diagram. Because I'll get into this in a second. But anyway, so the mold standard says you have to physically strip this layer out with some kind of physical method. So we're looking at like sanding or wire brushing or blasting. We like to HEPA sand, where you take a sander and hook it up to a HEPA vacuum and sand the wood. On bigger projects or really intricate projects, we'll do what's called soda blasting. And I have a video on YouTube about an example of that, where we painted some wood framing and soda blasted it. And soda blasting is basically like power washing. If you've ever seen somebody come and power wash your deck or your sidewalk or something, where they take that high jet of water, that compressed water, and spray it at a high speed at the sidewalk. So soda blasting is like that, except instead of water, we use baking soda. So we're throwing the baking soda at a high speed at the wood, and it strips the mold right out. It's the most thorough method to strip mold out of wood, but it's very violent, and it's a lot of setup that we have to do to make sure we have control of that, and we're not making the situation worse. So it's the lead tech's judgment call about if we use soda blasting or not. But anyway, And then within the diagram, I put these notes in here, because the mold will eat the wood and it will actually stain the wood quite a bit. So the roots of the mold will stop here, but the stain, the actual mold stain in the wood will go deeper. So a lot of times this is a judgment call on the behalf of the technicians, and that's why experience is so important, because a lot of times we'll have to go down a 32nd of an inch into the wood to strip all the mold out, but it's a judgment call of, how far down do you go, how far down is good enough. And a lot of guys, they'll just do a little quick surface thing, but they don't go down far enough. The chemical snake oil companies, if you're going to go down to Home Depot and buy bleach or buy Concrobium or Mold Armor Plus, and spray it onto the visible mold, well, what happens is that it will bleach the color out of the mold. And so, people see this and psychologically they go, oh, I killed it. I don't have to worry about it anymore. I must be safe because I don't see it anymore. And in reality, it's like bleaching your hair, where your hair is still there, it's just blonde now. And so the mold is still there, the roots, the spores, everything that makes people cause allergic reactions is still there and still present. As a matter of fact, there's some evidence, some research that's gone into this, that the mold actually knows that it's under attack, and if somehow it fights back with the mycotoxins and stuff, so it actually responds to the environment, which makes sense because mold is a plant. So. The immaculate cleaning, this is the last step that we do. This is actually the hardest thing to teach new technicians. So even though we've had this chamber under negative air pressure the entire time, there's still millions of mold spores that will settle on the floor, the walls, and the ceiling just like dust. And so what we have to do is a 3-step cleaning process to HEPA vacuum, damp wipe, and HEPA vacuum every square inch of this chamber to get all the mold spores up. And also, too, it's to get the mycotoxins up. If you ever get clients that call you up and complain about mycotoxins, these are typically mold sensitized clients, and these people usually have a high degree of knowledge about mold and what they're talking about. Let me go back to the first page here. I didn't get into this, but a mold spore is imagine like a bowling ball, and the mycotoxins are actually how the molds fight other molds for food, right? Because Mother Nature's brutal. Everything's a competition. And so typically if you see a bunch of mold on the wall, it's not all one species of mold. Typically there'll be, 2, 5, 10, 100, depending on how bad the water situation is. There'll be a bunch of different species of mold growing on the wall, and they're all fighting each other for food with chemicals, these mycotoxins, to try to beat each other back, And so anyway, these mycotoxins, they coat the outside of spores and they coat the outside of the mold colony and stuff. But let's just talk about the mold spores for now. So anyway, they coat the outside of the mold spore. And so if you imagine this thing's like a bowling ball, and wherever the bowling ball rolls around, it's going to leave this little trail of mycotoxins. And the mycotoxins are not, they're actually a chemical. And so the problem is the spore is a physical particle. You can vacuum it up, but you can't vacuum up chemicals. You can't vacuum up something sticky, right? If your kid spills juice on the table and it dries, you can't vacuum that up. It has to be wiped up. So going back to this step, the first round, the cleaning is to go ahead and HEPA vacuum. So what this wand represents, these are all mold spores that this vacuum is moving from right to left. So just vacuum this area, it's going this way. And so the red dots represent mold spores, and the blue dots represent leftover mycotoxins. So again, the vacuuming is picking up the mold spores, and mycotoxins are left over. And then what we'll do is a series of damp wiping. And the damp wiping, we actually use a mixture of rubbing alcohol, 50-50 mix of rubbing alcohol and water, because rubbing alcohol is the gentlest chemical that science has found that will what's called denature the proteins in the mycotoxins. It basically makes them unsticky. And other chemicals work, but they're a little bit more dangerous because the problem, I won't say dangerous. We have a lot of mold sensitized clients, and the thing about the mold sensitized clients is usually they react to chemicals as well. So they're not only mold sensitized, but chemically sensitized. And so you don't want to use a lot of chemicals in their house unless you just absolutely have to, because you don't know if they're going to react to that, and you don't want to make the situation worse. So anyway, so we mixed, actually it was Wilkes, Bernie Bloom and Charlie Wilkes, came up with a thing where, we use a 50-50 mix of isopropyl alcohol and water and a couple drops of Dawn dish soap mixed in as a surfactant. But anyway, so you damp wipe, and what this does, again, moving from left to right, these are sticky mycotoxins, these are unsticky mycotoxins, because you can't really see it, but these are a lighter shade of blue than these are dark blue. And then the third step is to HEPA vacuum the space. Again, working your way from left to right. And this is just within the diagram. I'm not saying all cleaning walls you have to work from left to right, but there actually is a methodology to clean walls. You work your way from top to bottom. You don't want to clean the bottom of the wall and then clean the top, because you're just rubbing that stuff back onto the surfaces you just cleaned. So anyway, so you HEPA vac, damp wipe, and HEPA vac. Now some of my guys, they like to HEPA vac, damp wipe, and damp wipe, and that's okay. But the point is, this cleaning process, it's really hard to explain this to a client that this is what they're paying for. It's not something it's not like it's a new toaster or soda blasting or something where it's very dramatic. You can see clear as day the difference between the old moldy wood, and new wood. So this is they see this space and it looks clean, and then we just make it even cleaner. So it's not as dramatic, but this is very critical. Because what I tell people is the reason they hire us is not for our skills at demolition, because I hate to say this, but any moron can cut out drywall. That's not a skill. What these clients hire us for is our skills at the negative air pressure containment, because this whole setup is what keeps them safe while the work is going on and prevents mold from spreading into other parts of the house. And by the way, that's mold spores spreading into other parts of the house. I'm not saying, because that's the other thing too. A lot of times people think if this is done wrong and these mold spores get out, that mold's going to just start growing on the wall in the next room. That's not true. The mold spores only grow into a visible colony when there's water present, right? And so what we're worried about, the reason we go through all this, is because we don't want the mold spores in the other room, because we don't want clients to breathe that crap in. It's really bad for their health, because it's the chronic exposure to mold spores is what causes a lot of health reactions in people. And so, a lot of times people think that if they're exposed to mold today and they're not sick tomorrow, then they must be not allergic to mold and they must be fine. And actually that's not true. If you're exposed to, mold, low levels of mold every day for 10 years, what happens is that some people, or a vast majority of people, it's still up for debate in medicine, but the point is there's a good portion of the population that gets to be mold sensitized. And so the problem is you don't want to be one of those people. So, why take these chances? It's almost like, people think it's like mold is like raw sewage where you're exposed today and you'll get sick tomorrow. But actually mold is more like cigarette smoke. You're exposed to it for 10 years and then maybe you get lung cancer, maybe you don't. But who wants to take that risk? And so that's why we're employed, really, is to keep these spores out of their living space. So anyway, back to what I was saying. Sorry, I get off tangent a lot. People think they hire us to cut out the mold, and really what they hire us for is our skills at the negative air pressure containment, because this is what keeps them safe during our work. And then they also too hire us for our skills at the immaculate cleaning, because this is what keeps them safe for years down the road after the containment barriers come down. And I'm going to say another note here about mold testing, because I know you guys get a lot of calls about this, and you have to talk to clients about the value of PRV testing or doing the Instascope test once the work is complete. So I as owner of Valor, I love it if clients have third-party PRV testing done. One, I'm not scared of failing testing. Our pass rate's like 96% on the first try. So our pass rate's extremely good. It always has been. So we don't fail that often. It happens. I mean, if we fail, we'll come back out and reclean. We're not going to sit there and play the finger-pointing game and try to argue with folks and all that kind of stuff. If it tests high within our containment, we're just going to come out and reclean it. We're not going to make it into a big deal. But I love it because of the liability aspect. If we clean this space and the client brings out their own mold tester and the mold tester clears it, but then the water issue isn't fixed and mold reappears on this wall 3 years later, I'm going to go, hey, your guy cleared us. Don't get mad at me. This is another water damage event. It wasn't fixed. It's going to be more money. Hey. The problem we kept running into, though, was clients would hear how much testing is and how long it takes, because the cheapest competent mold tester charges about $600, $800 for a site visit fee, plus $50, $75 for each sample. And so they hear that's going to be $1,000 or so, and they're like, well, I'm already paying a lot to have the remediation done. I'm going to pay a lot to have the rebuild done. I'll just skip it. And the other thing they don't like is it usually takes a week by the time the tester comes out and gets the results, or sends the results to the lab. The lab gets back to him with the results. He writes a report and all that. it's a big deal if that we're adding a week onto somebody's kitchen being down or the only bathroom in the house or something, that's really not good. So as a result, we only had about 10% of clients that were hiring a third-party mold tester to verify that that all the mold was out of here, or at least back to a normal level, and it was safe to take the containment barriers down. So that's actually the driving force behind why we bought the Instascope was, if they're not going to hire a third-party mold tester, then fine. We're going to come in with our Instascope and check it ourselves. And it's a PRE, which is post-remediation evaluation. And these are actually legal terms. They're specified within the S520. A post-remediation evaluation is what a remediator does to check his own work, whereas a post-remediation verification, a PRV, is only an unbiased third party can do that. So we can't do a PRV. It has to be an unbiased third party tester. So anyway, so the purpose of the Instascope is just to do our internal quality control, and then we share the results with the client. But don't sugarcoat it. It is a conflict of interest, and the only reason I'm comfortable offering this to clients is because the Instascope is very unique. There's only 51 on the planet so far, and the thing I love about it is that it's green, yellow, red, right? Each room is green, yellow, or red, and so it's not me telling the clients what the test results say. It's me and the client looking at the report together, going, okay, what did this come back as? And if it's yellow or red, we're just going to re-clean the room till it turns green. If it's already green, testing green, then great. We can take everything down and leave. So it takes care of the conflict of interest. And also, too, there was a problem with the chain of custody because for years and years, I would always tell people, don't have a remediator do his own testing, because what guys would do is they would take a sample, and traditional form of testing, you have a tripod and you pump air onto this little cassette on the tripod for 5 minutes, and then you seal up the little cassette and mail it off to the lab, and then the lab analyzes it. But what these guys were doing was they would take the cassette and throw it out the window when they drove up the street, and then go to their office where they had a clean room set up, and then mail that, take a sample in the clean room and then mail that to the lab as if that came from the client's house. So there's a big problem with the chain of custody. Whereas the Instascope does the results in real time. It doesn't create the report until I'm done checking the rooms. But point is, the client, if they're looking over my shoulder and there's a bunch of mold in one room, they're going to see it because this thing's going to go crazy. It has all kinds of like blue lines and stuff on it that will go off, and the room will be changing from green to yellow to red. And I'll do a video on that later so you know what that looks like in real time, so it'll help explain it to clients. But anyway, this is now 27 minutes. I've gone on for quite a while, but yeah, this is I call this the 4-phase diagram. Because the front page is the education on mold, and then we get into the 4 phases here, explaining proper mold remediation. And this isn't, by the way, this isn't our way to remediate. This is the way to remediate. So this isn't like this is some unique proprietary Valor system way of doing stuff. This is the way any remediation should be done across the entire country, from California to Maine. It makes no difference. This negative air pressure is not the Rolls-Royce version of remediation. This is the Honda version of remediation. This is the bare minimum standard. And just people just don't realize this. So anyway, all right, thanks guys, take care.